back with you on Do I Need a Bigger Mouthpiece? And you'll remember from the last episode, I said good morning, and it was a Saturday at 8 a.m. And we find ourselves here 9 days later, a Friday at 9:19 p.m.
Dude, we are
And
all
I
over the
can't,
map. All over
I
the
don't
map.
know, we're all over the map, and I can't tell if it's because we're dedicated or disorganized or both. But the
I
important
think you're
thing is,
forgetting about foolish. We might be foolish.
foolish, tired, and spread thin as well. But the cool thing about that is we are dedicated to continue to have these important discussions and to provide this information to you guys. And honestly, it helps us as well because it allows us to hash through our ideas together and provide different perspectives because we do have different perspectives. And this is an episode that could highlight a little bit of that because what is it that we're going to be talking about today, Alex?
We are doing a survey on high register building for brass players.
Yeah, that's a heavy topic. And that is, we're approaching Thanksgiving. And if you're in a family full of brass players, it might be a sensitive topic to bring up around the Thanksgiving table because of how divisive it could be. But although of all years, there's probably other more divisive
I could
topics that
only
can get
imagine
covered that can be covered.
this is going to be a
But
spicy Thanksgiving for a lot of people, I suspect.
for a ton of people all across the great United States. But no, this is something that, like so many of our previous episodes, Alex and I didn't really hash things together beforehand. Instead, we compiled some notes, compiled some thoughts, talked a little bit before we hit record. And I think that it's fair to tell you, the listener, that we do have, I don't want to say dissenting opinions on this. I don't think that that's fair. I think that we have different ways of thinking about it, going about high register. We're not going to talk necessarily ad nauseum low register today, but just register stuff in general. The good news is, I think that we're both educated on the topic, and there is, in my colloquial way of saying, I think there's a couple ways to skin the cat. And I think that something that I'll maybe mention or just leave here and mention here is that for young brass players, oftentimes their approach, in my opinion and from my own experience, is a little bit, it's not very nuanced. It's very much like I am the hammer and my work ethic is going to prevail into a high register. And typically that comes from the idea that the high register is bound in strength and the high register is not like deadlifting. So I find myself saying that a lot in lessons to students, especially new students, Alex, where it's like I watch them play and I'm like, you look like you're working really hard to do this. And I hate to break it to you, but that's, you got to go the other way. So anyway, I'm going to let you kind of take a bit of a lead here, Alex, on some of your thoughts. And I'm going to kind of just jump in and have my stuff to say, but let you take it away for a bit.
Sure. Well, I fundamentally agree with what you said. High range is not a strength exercise, right? And when you turn high range into a strength exercise, you create a capitalized problem on the exact system you need to work in the high range, right? And that's our lips. So fundamentally, when you play any pitch on the trombone, your lips buzz. This is just how it works. You're playing a B flat, your lips are buzzing that B flat. If you want to play a B flat an octave higher, your lips have to buzz twice as fast. This is not opinion. This is fact. This is what is happening. To make that happen, you have a bunch of different mechanisms that you can leverage in your body. You can move the air faster. You can change your aperture's diameter, shrink it down, tighten the aperture size. You can raise the tongue in the back of the mouth to create a choke point that speeds up the air. These are all things you can do. You can also tighten your lips, which will give you a short-term burst of high range growth. But if you do that, you are tightening the vibrating surface, and that makes it so that your lips will no longer vibrate, which makes the sound stop. It chokes out, kind of like an engine. And this is that sound that we all hear when people that are young are trying to play high, and the sound just kind of breaks down. And
Mhm.
this is fundamentally tied to the body response of tightening. So if you're trying to use strength in the high range, it is functionally the most problematic choice you can make.
Yeah, I kind of think of it as like, from what you're saying, is a bit of I tell students there's a ratio, and typically when they get to this choking point, I'm saying that their high range or their sound in general at that point is being carried by like 85% lips and 15, if that, percent air,
That feels right.
and that
That feels right.
the support just isn't there, and that's not the mechanism that should be doing the work. So yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
sounds right.
I'll throw an anecdote in here. So one of the to preface this anecdote, one of the things that most people come to me to study is high range. This is the thing that I work hard to figure out for people. And I really struggled with high range my whole life up until I was in my mid 20s. I could not really do it. When I was in undergrad, I struggled to play a high C all the way through undergrad. And I only figured it out later. But one of the most helpful things I ever experienced for my high range playing was a lesson with Don Lucas. And as you know all too well, a Don
Shout
Lucas
out to Uncle
lesson,
Donnie.
yeah, shout out to Uncle Donnie. A lesson with Uncle Donnie is not a 1 hour endeavor. It is a 3 or 4, if you're lucky, an hour endeavor with a lot of panning for gold. He loves telling the stories, and they are great. But I'll tell you, this lesson, which went more than 3 hours, had a lot of stories involved. And in the middle, he told me this story about when he studied with Dennis Wick in London, pursuing his doctorate. And Don said to me that Dennis Wick, who is still alive in his 90s, obviously retired trombonist of the London Symphony, is the guy on the Star Wars recordings, amazing pedagogue, and also mute designer and mouthpiece designer. Dennis Wick had this quote that Don would always tell and told me in this lesson: there is nothing as easy as playing high, but there is nothing as difficult as figuring out how easy it is to play high. And this
Mhm.
this quote is just perfect because it describes exactly how these things work. And with Don gave me this analogy of a garden hose, and I'll share it now because it was an absolute breakthrough for me. If you go over to the shed and you plug the hose into the spigot and you turn it on and you put it so it's halfway on, so half of the tube is filled with water and it's coming out the end, that's like a B flat. And then you take your thumb and you cover half the tube. What you've done is you've reduced the distance around the hose by 50%, which means that the pressure is going to go up by a factor of 2. That's basically going to speed the air up to twice the speed if you're using it as playing. But in the hose, you're going to speed the water up twice as fast. So that's basically like an octave jump. The downside is that your thumb is now feeling that pressure. And this is what happens to our lips if we increase the pressure of playing. Our lips eventually start to break apart, and the natural reaction is to tighten your lips. And this is another way we can get involved in the strength game accidentally. So what Don really convinced me of in a very like sound argument was that you need less air in the high range, not more. And this was a game changer for me because he said to me, you would be hard pressed to find brass pedagogues that will agree with this publicly, because it is a dangerous thing to say to a young student, because oftentimes young students are stopping the air and you need to be using lots of air. But in the high range, you're not going to increase the amount of air. You're only going to increase the speed, and you're going to increase the support that keeps it. And by doing so, as you raise and pitch, you allow your lips to vibrate. You're not increasing the pressure as much. You're just decreasing the diameter of your aperture. Pitch is going to slowly raise and it's not going to feel any harder.
Yeah.
So finding this balance is where the progression starts for me, and just keeping
I
it
have to
super easy.
I have to quickly give a double Uncle Donnie shout out really quick because of another related story that he told that really changed my conception of what you're talking about at a very different stage in my life. He was a guest artist at Texas State in the year 2011,
Oh,
11,
brave,
12.
dating yourself. Look at you
I
go.
think 2012. Yeah. Yeah, not as long ago, but yeah, quite. And so I was going through Valsalva issues at that time. That was something that was really plaguing me. And I had a year where I really dealt with that. And it was, gosh, it was not a fun thing to deal with, but I'm glad that I went through it because it figuring it out has helped my pedagogy and helped my own so many things. But anyway, he mentioned this concept of using too much air in the high register, where I was going in when I was going to play in the high register, I was taking a big old fat breath,
Totally.
and I had way too much air that had nowhere to go. And what did it do? It just locked me down completely. And so it was his idea. And it was not me talking to him. It was just him pontificating as he does and giving a lot of great stories. But he just mentioned that when you're going to play Bolero B flat, you don't have to take in this huge breath of air. Like you only need the amount of air that you need for a high B flat, which is considerably less in terms of volume than you need the octave below and the octave below that.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
so this man knows what he's talking about.
Yeah. I mean,
He
if you have not
does some good
heard,
stuff.
if you've not heard Don Lucas's album from the early 80s, it's called Cantabile. This is an album of lyrical playing, and Don did an arrangement of the solo from Schindler's List on this album, which he takes up into the super B flat range at the end. And it is effortless, flawless vocal. It is some of the best playing I've ever heard in my life. And when you talk to Don about his solo CDs from the 80s, when he was this monster soloist and just really one of the top players alive, he goes, "Oh, it's no big deal. Oh, it's just I wasn't happy with that CD anyway." And you're like, "Don, this CD is amazing. Like, it's really special." "Oh, well, thanks.
Yeah.
No big deal. No big deal."
Yeah, yeah.
A man of
That's
humility, truly.
he
Um,
is. He's the best.
yeah. So fundamentals here. When you're working on the high range, you want to keep things effortless. And if you can't, don't go higher. It's that simple, right? So there are tons of exercises you can do that are available. Most things work pretty well as long as you're doing them correctly. So understanding the mechanics that we are messing with a few different variables as we ascend into the high range. We are changing our oral cavity to face different vowel shapes, meaning the back of the tongue raises, in the middle range, all. As we go up, that slide that my tongue is doing, that's placement for the vowel. And that's going to determine when the air enters your mouth to go into the horn, that's going to determine where the choke point is that speeds it up. This is important. Another tool that we can use, aperture size. That's the actual aperture size that the air is leaving. And you can work on that with buzzing. You can work on that just blowing air through. You can work on that with a mirror. You can just have a look and make sure that it maintains a circular shape and you're dilating it like a camera lens. I'm going to say this one more time. A camera lens dilates in a circle. And this is really important because when a lot of people play high, they crunch down, lips vertically, up and down, instead of dilating. And this is so, so important because if you crunch it down and you lose the shape of your aperture, you won't get a buzz.
Yeah, it just stops. The vibrations cease.
Yeah. I
And
mean,
then you might temporarily blow harder back to that point and find very, very minimal success, but it will be on a limited term basis.
and chances are your lips will blow out anyway because the pressure is more than your lips as muscles can contain. Yeah. The final thing is speed, right? So we can mess with the speed of the air. And as long as it's consistent, you can speed the air up to go higher. And this is done with your core, with your solar plexus, with your support, having a healthy breath that is supported from the bottom, making sure that you're not using throat tension, because throat tension is the easiest ultimate killer of high range. Tongue tension and throat tension equally are just brutal. You have to make sure your throat is open the whole way. No matter what range you're in, the throat stays open. And in order for that to happen, you have to have support because if your throat's not going to do the muscling, it's got to be your core. So,
So you would say through that you advocate for core engagement?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's because in the middle range, we can get away with not having the air be supported immediately and not lose the note. If you play a B flat and your core isn't supported, you usually won't lose the note. But if you play a high B flat and your core isn't supported, you miss the note. You won't even get the buzz out. If your core is engaged and the air doesn't change its speed and it's correct, the note will sound no problem. And you can go much higher in the same way, all the way up to super B flat with generally not a lot of tension on the face, provided that system is working correctly with no tension. Because you can get away with playing in the middle range without core tension and still have the note sound, we as brass players get lazy. And as a result of that, we learn to play without the core tense sometimes. And then when it's really a difficult passage, you might remind yourself to do it. You've got to get in the habit of keeping it tight all the time because that means that you're playing with reliable support from under and from sides. And that just helps the airstream be reliably the same speed from the moment you begin exhaling. You basically get it up to speed, accelerating like an electric car, not like a truck, right? We want that to leave the mouth at speed, not getting up to speed. Because, in the middle range, again, that's fine. But in the high range, you've already missed the note. You're not going to get it to sound.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I think the idea of support is something that gets misconstrued. I don't know. I say this as someone that I maybe has just battled with my own concept of what is support oftentimes, because I think support can often get heavy-handed, and support can a lot of times look like an overexertion of strength. And
Yeah.
I try my best. I don't know. This is the way I think it, and I'm giving you full license to tell me that I'm crazy or incorrect. But when I think of one of those like fire bellows,
Mhm.
it's not that they're, I don't know. It's it's pushing in on itself and it's just providing a nice stream of air. And I kind of like to just imagine myself as being a similar bellows. Like I'm
Mm.
filling up and then it's just the slightest push, but it's
Yeah.
not like I'm hunkering down. It's just, I have something to push against.
You're going to like
That's
this.
how I imagine it.
You're going to like this because you've walked me into a great moment here. So bellows are they're leather bags with a metal tip, and the metal tip
Hmm.
allows the air to go straight through, right? And you squeeze the bellows, and the air from inside the leather bags is pushed out the out the tip, and that's how they work, right? So we have an aperture on the leather bellow, just like we would if we were blowing from our lungs. But there's something else on a leather bellow that, if you think about, you might not realize, but with some thought, I will prove this to you. The outside of your leather bellows are two planks of wood, and those planks of wood are a hard material that allows a guaranteed direction of air from the bellows. They only go up because the bags can't inflate outward because there are wooden plates or aluminum plates or brass plates on some more ornamental bellows. Every Norwegian has bellows over their fire, so I've seen many of them. But
Yeah.
this is exactly how your support works, right? Because the support doesn't push the air up faster. That's not what it does. That would be a strength engagement. The support makes sure that the air goes up rather than going out into your lungs or down into your lungs. It only can go up. You've got support of the core around the sides of your lungs. You've got your rib cage muscles, sides of your lungs. And then you have your diaphragm at the base of your lungs, controlled by the solar plexus, because we can't flex our diaphragm. So when you breathe in, you lift your rib cage, you set your solar plexus with your core. And now when you breathe out, you basically have wooden bellow guards on the bottom and sides of your lungs, which pushes the air out.
So
Your
you said,
analogy was perfect, in
I was gonna
fact.
say you said a lot of words, but they basically equated to Kevin's a genius. Okay, thanks.
Kevin's a
Uh,
genius.
I appreciate it. No, that's incredible information. Now, you've used a word that a lot of you at home are going to be sitting there going, "What is that anatomical name that he keeps saying?" And I myself have to say, I would love clarification on what do you think I'm going to say?
The solar plexus, yes, of course.
There you go.
Welcome to Trombone Guide Teaching. Here we go. Okay, so if you take your hand and you run it all the way down your sternum, which is your breastbone, it's the plate that connects your two sides of your ribs, you get to the bottom, right about where your stomach would start, you'll feel that the bone stops and there's this tiny, weird little, what's about the size of a fist, but a fist facing sideways. It's about that size, small prime rib, 4 ounce piece of meat. That muscle actually spans around the entire front of your chest, left to right, and it is a support band of muscle that you have nerves on. And the solar plexus is attached to the vagal nerve, which is the nerve that your body uses to throw up when you are choking. It's also a nerve and it does this by alerting your body that you're choking, and the solar plexus engages and it forces you to cough. You see, when we were Neanderthals and we were eating a lot of raw meat, sometimes when you eat raw meat, you can get very sick. And so as a result, your body has this anatomic reaction to cough up. And it also prevents you from allowing that raw meat to fall into your lungs. Because again, your esophagus and your breathing tube are right next to each other. Should raw meat fall into your lungs, you die, infection. So we have this hardwiring, and this allows us to actually reverse engineer the body to guarantee that the sport goes into place. You can feel the solar plexus if you take your hand and lay it just below your breastbone, and then you cough. you'll feel that what happens immediately is the solar plexus flexes. You can't control it. It happens automatically. So by being aware of this, we can actually use that muscle and we can flex it with our throat open when we exhale. And you can train that to activate every time you exhale. And all it does is it activates as a flex below your lungs. And it pushes the diaphragm up, telling your lungs, hey, air is to go up, not down and then up. Because again, your lungs are a bag. But if you squeeze them from the sides, air goes up, but it also goes down. We don't want it going down because then it's slow. We want it going up, and we want it going up the same way every time. And that's why we activate these support muscles. I've simplified it a little bit, and I do a lot of teaching around this with my students, but this is the quick answer.
There you go, everybody at home. I know that that's an important clarification. So I'm glad that we took the time to get that.
So, Kevin, I've got some high range questions for you. You've talked a lot about your struggles with Valsalva issues. And for those of you that aren't familiar with this, this is an involuntary relationship between your neurology and a hesitation of exhale. It's pretty well understood now, but has a bunch of different manifestations that can trouble brass players. I've never dealt with it myself. I've coached a few students through it. It's definitely harrowing because it's not something you're actively doing. It's an autonomic response, which makes it very difficult to fix, kind of like a tremor or an injury. It requires some pretty serious trombone and brass therapy. But I want to ask you, could you talk a little bit about how you view the relationship between hesitation and the high range? I'm sure this is something you've thought a lot about in your pedagogy, the idea of like what a hesitation of the air might do in the high range and how we combat that conceptually in our practice.
Well, let me talk about what it does, obviously. My hesitation started because a dear friend, a well-intended and very pedagogically smart friend who's doing great stuff now, pointed out when I was an undergrad, he said, when you go to play Bolero, you breathe in, you stop, and then you play the B flat. And up to that point, I was like blissfully unaware of this and kind of unbothered by the whole instance.
Interesting.
But once he told me this, it was like this awareness just drove me freaking crazy. And so I wanted to be able to not do that. But then I quickly realized that I could not, at least at that point or whatever. And it was like an infection, Alex. It was so debilitating because first it started with the B flat, and then it's worked its way down to the F below that to where I couldn't do that. And then before I knew it, I could hardly breathe in and play a low B flat. Everything had been taken away from me. And so over the course of, like I said, about 12 months, this all kind of happened right around as I was getting ready to do master's auditions. Obviously, that's a real pain in the ass.
I was going to say, what could be better?
And so I had to trot that around and work around that. And all of my lessons for my master's that was a big chapter in every lesson that I took. And what I eventually came down to, and this kind of borrows from the Don thing, but what I teach students when I notice any bit of hesitation, because I'll say this from my experience, I would say, I don't want to say that a majority of students deal with Valsalva, but as brass players, when we get anxious, which 100% of brass players get anxious at some point, when we get anxious, this is most likely when this is bound to show up, because this is when we most often get overly aware of everything that's going on when we play the instrument, right? You are at your most detail oriented, whether you like it or not, before you're about to go do the important thing.
Totally.
And so what I've come to understand as what I would consider a recovered Valsalva person is that this is something that I still have to contend with when I'm nervous. But I've talked to enough people who are far greater than I in this field who also have said the same thing. And it was actually Jonathan Whitaker, Dr. Whitaker, that said, because when I got to my master's, I kind of had this unkinked a little bit. And he said, but it was bothering me at a particular juncture in my master's. And he said, well, you have XX and all this stuff going on right now. Like you're kind of anxious right now in your approach. This is going to be a problem. So anyway, what I've come to rationalize and help myself through this, and what I tell students a lot of the times, is that the speed of the air that is going out and the amount of the air that is going out is somewhat related or if not entirely related, to the speed of the air that's coming into my body.
Totally.
So if I am going to, and this was one of the reasons that I didn't really have a problem at low B flat. If I had to play organ symphony, okay, for whatever reason, I had the perfect understanding that that A flat that I was breathing and about to play, it was relaxed air. But I began to think that the color of the sound that I wanted to play in was the color of the sound that I would breathe in. And so that A flat, I had a particular color and I had a particular speed. And then, of course, I was still breathing in time. And that helped me come in on that register. Now, let's take a step backwards and say that just because I was breathing in time for all the other stuff, it wasn't happening, right? Like it didn't matter. At that, when I was talking tuba mirum, B flat, bolero B flat, or David E flat, whatever you want to call it, all these different notes, I couldn't bring them in time. But once I began to make the correlation that the speed of the air that I wanted to exit my body would be the speed of the air that I would bring in, and then I would line that up metronomically, I began to find the ratio that was necessary for me to start notes on time. And when I get myself into trouble, I'll go back to what I said, 10, 15 minutes ago, is that I take in too much air and then I don't have anywhere to put it. And when that happens, that's when I continue to lock. I hope that that sort of answered that
Yeah.
question.
So to some extent, the inhale in the high range is qualitatively critical.
Yes. This is something that Toby helped me with too,
Mhm.
because the syllable, we've talked a little bit about syllable, but the syllable is really important.
Yeah.
When I'm about to come in the higher register, I have a distinctive sort of, I think of it as a hey breath, because hey sets my tongue up to be where it needs to be. And so
Interesting. I
it's
use
the light.
EH, which is
Yeah, I mean,
hey in reverse. So
yeah,
that's
yeah,
super interesting to me. Yeah,
yeah.
I remember. I think I drew at some point. I drew it like a speedometer, like a gas gauge on a car, and it took me
Mhm.
from. So Norman Bolter talks about EAUX, the French as his lowest
Mm,
note. That's his pedal range for his throat, and he goes all the way up, a, o, So it's like to UGH, to O, OH, to eh, to a, to e, and like at the very top, it's like I, and your tongue is basically curved with the back high, and that's like if you were to enter on like super F or something, like your tongue and vowel is at I shape.
yeah,
Super interesting.
you're setting yourself up to be in the right spot as you breathe. And I think that is what a lot of Valsalva ish like patients, if you will, a lot of people struggling with that are actually that's one of the root causes is their tongue is not in a place to be successful when they breathe in, and it has to go somewhere, but in the time that it has to go somewhere, they hesitate, and
Totally.
then they sputter the first note or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, high man, like what for me, gluing the inhale to the exhale, as you know, I tell my students, the note begins at the inhale. It does not begin at the exhale. Once you've begun inhaling, you're already playing the note because they are
Yes.
intrinsically one act to the
Yeah.
that there's no divide there. You can't have your brain go, oh shit, in the middle of that. Nope, because you've already begun playing. You're already playing. You don't hesitate on a note once you're blowing it, once you're buzzing a note. That's
Yeah.
never a problem. It's the start. And surprise, the start is the inhale. It's
I've
already happening.
I've mentioned my Alexander Technique coach a couple times in this podcast so far, and that was exactly one of the things she said. Because again, this is still something that I am susceptible to. I can proudly say that I have displayed to myself at this point that I'm out of the funk. It took a while, but my AT coach, she said that exactly what you said. The note already exists on a plane, and we're simply kind of like running next to the train and jumping in on it.
Yeah, yeah.
It already exists. And so I have this really weird thing that I think about. It goes back to breathing in the color, but I sort of imagine the color of the sound swirling around me as I breathe, and then I just come in within that color of sound.
Yep.
Again, it's very ethereal and very
No,
kind of weird.
you're not far off from me. For me, it's a river and I'm in a
Mhm.
canoe on the side and I enter the flowing river and I go with it and then I get out of the river without stopping. I move to the side and then step out. But the river's always flowing.
Yeah, there you go.
It's the same
It's inter-
analogy in a different in different visualization. Yeah. So we've kind of hinted at this, but to just jump out and say it, high range is a super mental game. And
Hmm.
while you're developing it and you're working on it, and this is credit where credit is due. This is a Toby Offism that was probably one of the more important things he shared with me in my time studying. We cannot play in the high range to failure. It doesn't work because high range is where many brass players carry most of their trauma. You have to build a trust with your brain that you are good at high range playing. And for that reason, you cannot push yourself to exhaustion. You cannot go to failure like you would at the gym. If you're building your high range and your highest note is a B flat and you get up to an A and your A's are sounding pretty good, play two or three of them and then stop because you need to end your session. I mean, obviously work your way back down, but like you end your high range work on a high where you are succeeding because your brain needs to remember success. You need to slowly train it in a series of successes with no failure because over time your brain will learn to associate high range with a successful endeavor. I can go a pretty decent chunk of change without practicing high range now because my brain has a deep belief that I do it well. That was not an accident. I had to build that up. That trust was not always there. So if you have a high note that is your limit, approach it, but don't get all the way up to it. Stay in a place where you're not failing. Continue to succeed. Stop. Work your way back down. Treat it like a stretch. Put it away and come back again tomorrow. Slowly move that window upward over time rather than trying to just beat your face into submission because you're on a clock and you've got to hit these notes by this. No, no, no. This is a process.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think that one of the key things that a lot of younger students will err on, and even more advanced students, is they'll get concerned about the musculature. They'll get concerned about, and when I say the musculature, I mean the strength aspect of it. And they'll get really concerned with being able to feel. Like, I want to know what it feels like.
Mhm.
And I think I've swung a couple different directions on this. When I was young and dumb, I also was completely concerned with what it should feel like. What should it feel like to play a high C? What should it feel like to play a high D? And then as I got a little bit more enlightened, if you will, I began to understand the importance of hearing it orally and understanding that if I'm aiming towards a note, I better have it in my head before I'm about to start playing it, or else just feeling it, especially when things are on the line, it's never going to go well.
Wow.
And now what I've kind of settled on a little bit more is that it's a ratio for me where hearing it is still more important, but building upon the success, kind of like a free throw shooter, and knowing what it feels like while accompanying that sound in my head is, for me right now today in 2024, the truest thing that I'm aiming for. Like, I want to know what I understand now, and this was actually, couldn't tell you where, Alex, but it was a couple conversations with you at some point over the last 3 years where we talked about what a high F feels like. At that time when we talked about that, I couldn't tell you what a high F felt like. I had played one, but I couldn't tell you what it felt like. Since that conversation, I've reintegrated some of the importance behind understanding the tactile sensation, but not letting it be the leading thing for
Mm.
me. For me, at least, it's not. It's still sort of go by what's in your head, but understand what you should expect to feel, if that makes sense.
Totally. Hmm. So the oral point of this is audiating is obviously very important because it allows your subconscious to lock into patterns, and pattern recognition is how we achieve everything on a brass instrument. For
Mhm.
me, and this is my body mapping training kicking in here, which is something that I've been on for a couple of years and I'm going for certification, and I absolutely love it. It's very interesting. Building a map in your mind, a neural map for the reality of a high range feedback, the feeling you get playing high, not being here, but being the feeling of the speed of the air has been an absolute game changer for me. So I know what a high C feels like, but I don't know what it feels like to buzz a high C. I only know what it feels like to move the air at high C speed. And I know it so well that that I can get it pretty close, within so and so, and I can hear the pitch on the air stream and know that I'm there. But what's so fascinating about this is that the reality of getting a note to speak is that we want as little tension on the lips as possible with the corners in place. But it is actually the air that makes the note speak, right? The lips vibrate reactively to the air passing through them.
Mhm.
We don't start a
Mhm.
pitch with a buzz, we start it with air. And so if you can,
Say that again for some of some younger
all
people, because that's so important. We
right,
do
I'm
not
I'm gonna
start the
drop
pitch
it.
with a
I'm
buzz.
gonna drop it.
Yeah.
And here's your social media clip, everyone, right here. The biggest lie in brass playing is that we buzz our lips. We do not. Our lips buzz reactively as air passes through them because you cannot make a buzz without air. It just clogs like an engine starting without gas. It just rolls over and cuts. When air passes through the lips, if they are loose enough and they're in the right place and the aperture is set, they will buzz. And so we do not buzz ever. It is not an active act. It is a passive act that is reactive to the air that we are blowing. We blow the air at a specific speed and the lips are put into place and it buzzes. That's how it works.
Yeah. Yeah.
So getting this around, this is reality, right? And some people experience it differently. Some players are very successful with a lot more lip tension than maybe they need. And they would say, well, I buzz. I'm not here to challenge how they feel. I'm just telling you that the physics of what's going on are not up for debate.
And unfortunately, so many of us, and this isn't, I'm not trying to dog on band directors right now. That's the last thing I'm trying to do. But I can say that so many of his trombone players, when we're put in front of a music teacher for our beginning class, one of the first phrases that's made is like, well, how do you make a sound on trombone? Well, you buzz your lips.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah. I mean, that's
that
what
is,
everybody, we all had that. We all had that.
yeah,
Buzz the
yeah,
mouthpiece, buzz the lips. How many people buzz on their mouthpiece by closing their throat off? We all did it. It's
yeah,
terrible. It's not how you play, of course.
yeah.
It just encourages muscular activation and tension. But more importantly, you need to learn air speeds because that's what forms the tone of what you're doing. That's what forms the pitch. If you go over to a piano and I blindfold you and I put your finger in front of middle C and I say, Kevin, can you play me middle C? You're not going to miss it. It's an up and down motion. You're blindfolded. You can't see it, but you're not moving. Now, if I go over and I do the same thing, but I put you in a chair and it's a wheelie chair and I shake you and I also shake the piano, you're not going to hit the C. You have no idea where it is. There's no perspective. So this idea is really important, particularly in the high range, because that middle C gets thinner and thinner key as we go higher. But every motion, every hesitation, every muscle lock, every tension, every change, every embouchure pivot, these are all shaking the piano. The system works perfectly. It's an up and down motion. It's binary. It's air or no air. We want to play a high B flat. We move our air at that speed. We have our lips set in position. We have our corners locked. We don't move. And we build that repetition. So our body trusts that system over thousands of repetitions. Eventually, you don't miss that note. I
Mhm.
mean, many of you trombonists that are listening, if I gave you a trombone and I said, your life depends on it, play me a middle F, how many are you going to miss? Very few. Very, very, very few. If I say your life depends on it, play me a double high D. That's more difficult because you don't have the reps of doing it relaxed. This is this is so important to think about. Like we want to minimize the complexity of the system, which means we're removing tension, we're removing muscle, we're removing activation. I mean, I remember a master class that Alessi gave when I was in high school or college, or young college. He said something like, "You all have the strength to play. Your embouchures have the strength to play in the New York Philharmonic. It's not about strength. It's about nuance. It's about nimbleness. It's about nerve control, sensitivity. It's about function, knowledge, and positioning, and having a really good setup." I didn't understand that, but as I've gotten better and better about using less muscle, I've actually lost muscle on my face because the face evolves. It doesn't need it.
Mhm.
It's a very
Mhm.
interesting phenomenon that if you're not a strong player and a smart player, well, you're going to lose muscle because you don't need it anymore. You're not using it. It's a much better sound too. There's much more resonance.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I feel pretty good about all the things that have been discussed here. I guess as we get towards the home stretch, something that I feel if I was listening to this and recollecting everything we said, that students would go, okay, all of that's great, but what do I do?
Oh yeah.
What do you want me to go play, Alex? Like you gave me all the cool concepts, but what's when pen goes to paper, what am I actually going to go play tomorrow that's going to help me do this?
Well, I think you're the better person to ask than this. Why don't you jump in? You have lots of ideas on this.
Oh yeah. So I'm going to preface this by saying that this isn't everything that we do, we risk doing the wrong way. Toby often talks about this, where even the solution becomes the problem if you
Yeah.
just overdo the solution, right? So where I got my first understandings of how to make this happen was for me the Brad Edwards Lip Slur book. That was something that I came into contact with my freshman year of college, and I used it incorrectly at first. Okay, I want that to be very a buddy of mine and I would play the first 35 slow exercises between the hours of 12:30 a.m. and 3 in the morning.
Oh,
And
that
that's
is a
not how
nice night for a neck injury. Holy cow.
yeah, that is not how you freaking do that, ladies and gentlemen. Do not do that. However, that lip flexibilities, lip slurs, that is one exercise that you can do. Arpeggios, scales. These things are important. And in my notes, I have glisses, and more glisses. So when we're talking about building the ability to climb upwards, we have the built-in nature of scales being a perfect guide for doing this and also being a perfect benchmark. Alex mentioned if B flat is, your top note and you're finding yourself sort of topping out at A with resonance, and that's as far as you go. But let's think about this. What's a good exercise to do that? Well, first, let's start on a single octave scale, glist. You know that you can start that bottom note with a wonderful sound and a great setup and all of that. And then it's your responsibility through that glist to keep everything facile. That's my favorite word when I talk about the high register is facile, is keep everything nice and relaxed with the tongue and to the point where you're getting a great sound. Once you're able to do that on one octave, moving upwards, then we want to expand that to two octaves. I think I would say from an industry standard perspective, most working trombonists would want to be able to connect two registers in either direction at all times, from top to bottom, bottom to top. And so that's a good benchmark. And you can sort of, yeah, I would say just don't rush that process. Be very honest with yourself about where you're at, but use those scales and arpeggios, lip slurs. Okay. I think where students get into a lot of trouble, and I alluded to this earlier, I think, but they approach the high register in just a singular fashion. They go, well, I was told to do long tones, so I'm only going to do long tones. That's great. However, long tones, you're not going to be able to creepy crawly your way up to a high D flat all the time chromatically because you did your long tones up there. Sometimes you're going to have to get up there in an arpeggiated fashion or in a more uncomfortable, awkward intervallic fashion. So doing interval exercises, I think interval exercises is a great litmus test and a silver bullet myself. When I watch really good players with really great high registers and low registers for that matter, doing accurate interval exercises, complicated interval exercises, I typically think that, okay, that is proof that they have got this thing figured out in whatever range that they're playing, right? And so find the Arbenz interval studies and work your way up comfortably and take note of where it is that you're no longer comfortable. But I think, and this is where it requires a lot of discipline on you, the player. You have to be very true to yourself and very honest with yourself about keeping perfection, keeping ease intact. Because the nature, and Alex, I'm sure you can back me up on this, the nature is to push past it. The nature is to go, oh gosh, I'm so close. I gotta see, why can't I get a high D? And then you find yourself working 15 minutes doing something in the key of D that's you're just practicing bad habits at that point.
Yeah.
So you have to stay patient and understand this is a long-term exercise. So for me, it's all the answers that we already know. And I have Toby's voice from this conversation we had one time where I asked him a question. He's like, you already know the answer.
Mm.
But truly, you kind of already know the answer. You know, it's a combination of long tones, it's interval exercises, it's lip slur exercises as well. Now, from an artistic standpoint, and this is a little bit more heady, but I don't think it's any less important, is it's listening. It's listening to players that play well up there. It's playing with recordings that play well up there And so if you're playing art songs done by soprano, done by mezzos, play real music with great recordings where your sound concept that's being provided to you is exemplary, and follow that sound concept and don't play past the point of getting hurt.
I agree.
Okay.
Yeah.
I hope that that's some physical, tangible things that one can go do and get some benefit from.
Yeah. I agree with all that 100%. I will say this. So when I coach students and professionals, that there are many professionals. I was just working with a gentleman last week who has a job in Europe in an orchestra, who has been working with me to try and build his high range. Excellent player, really excellent player. As he and every other student I have ascends into the high range and I'm monitoring what they're doing, I will tell you that almost 100% of the time, right before a student reaches their cap, the upper end of their range, I see something change in the way they're playing, whether it's their positioning or their tongue or their support or the air doesn't blow through or I see them tighten their throat. There's almost always a physical hitch that happens right before a student or a pro, for that matter, caps out, which tells me that what you're really doing when you're expanding your limits is you're expanding the area in which you can play the same way. We all have upper limits where our bodies start to panic a little and we start to make changes. And often this is an autonomic response that comes from feeling like you're getting to the limit. You need to tighten up. We hold the wall with tightening. We hold it off as far as we can. And so really what you're doing is you're just bathing your brain in comfort. You're letting it realize that it can go higher without getting uncomfortable. You can always push the limit. And so to that end, whatever you're practicing, do it calmly, do it comfortably. And I tell all my students to play in the mezzo piano range. I don't do the high range loud. In fact, if you go to Trombone Guide and you download any of my free high range resources, you'll notice I use this term whisper tones. And this is a word I made up, and it's basically the volume at which you would buzz. That much air, no more. So it's mezzo piano minus on the horn. We don't want to be using high flow in the high range. We want to be using exactly what's required and no more, because we want to build that control. I think doing it regularly, but not too much, not pushing, 15, 20 minutes a day is certainly plenty. Remembering it's not about strength. And to your point of listening, I want to go one step further here. Your sound concept in the high range should probably not be loud and powerful. It should be smooth and silky and light and effervescent and soaring. I've never heard, rarely, I shouldn't say never, I've rarely heard a high range player with a like blitzingly strong high range. I mean, Marshall Jilks can play in the high range and make it sound like you're getting hit by a baseball bat, that kind of compressive power. But very few people do that. I mean, he's really spectacular in this way. It's very unique. But I actually like a high range that's a bit more soaring. When I think of the best high range players in our industry, most of them have this angelic quality in their high range, and
Ethereal sounding.
yeah. And outside of trombone as well. I mean, if you listen to Terry Everson play trumpet, he's one of the most spectacular high ranges of any brass instrument I've ever heard. His sound is it's glowing in the high range, but it's not heavy. It's loud, but it's loud and glowing and light, and it vibrates like it's electric. Toby's sound in the high range sounds electric as well. It's really special. And I think that your concept of your sound can really have an impact on how you play. And making sure that it's not too heavy is really going to prevent you from getting muscly. You don't want to get tense in this range. It's not the right answer.
I do. I want to go back to a Dennis Wick story because I think it's a Dennis Wick story. And I can't confirm this because I know I've heard it and it seems like it was from Don, but who knows? About putting a high D on a student's horn. Have you heard this? It was some story where Dennis, like a student of Dennis Wick, got a brand new trombone, and the student couldn't play a high D, and Dennis was like, "Well, let me see that horn," and then, boom, ding, 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 just like smashed a high D into it a couple times, then gave it back to the student, and then the student, ding, 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 could play the high D, and I don't think that Dennis Wick physically put the high D on the instrument that, and made it capable. But instead, that was an example of the student hearing it and putting it together in their mind. because what that tells me is that the student didn't even know where they were going, and that all he did was show them what they should expect, what they should hear. And so what I notice, and this is an interesting thing to where I am in life right now, where I'm trying to stay sharp. I'm lucky that I've had some gigs. I have some more upcoming gigs and stuff like that. And I'm trying to keep a recital together, all these different things. But if I allow myself to be the best thing that I hear all day, I find that I'm always in trouble with that, especially over even a short period of time, even a week or 2 weeks. If I haven't been listening, not necessarily just to trombone, although I've made a point recently to listen to more trombone, really fine trombone playing. There's no shortage of that on Spotify, Apple Music, and all, and YouTube, all this stuff. But just listening to great vocalists, listening to the sounds that I want to achieve in my head. I was driving to teach today. When I teach on Mondays, I do not warm up before I go teach. Disclaimer, sorry. But I get there about 10 minutes before because I've been watching my daughter up until that point. And on the way there, I do some buzzing. And today I was listening to Toby's Bordoni videos, but other days I listen to other things and I kind of buzz along with that. And I felt this empowerment as I pulled out the horn today because I felt so solidly about what it was that was in my head that I was warm within a minute and I was ready to go.
Yeah.
I don't advise doing that on the regular, but that is just to say that concept drives a lot in our ability to do well in what we're striving to do.
Well, it's just it's more it's that, but it's also that doubt is self-doubt and hesitation of message of action message, like action message. These are the things that like all of practice is designed to get you over this hurdle, where like your body picks up the horn and goes to play and you know exactly what you're trying to do and you have a clear and concise idea and you do not hesitate. If you can remove those three things, you instantly become an unbelievable trombonist. You look at all these very, in the last 10 years, you look at these very specific wunderkind young trombonists that have won jobs at very young ages and just torn through conservatory and everybody knows their names. They just sound so good. When you get to know these people, I've known 5 or 6 of them, they actually all have one trait or two in common, and it's that they're a little bit aloof in their ability to doubt themselves. They're not overthinkers. They kind of are just like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna do the thing, and it's either gonna happen or not, but I'm just gonna do it. And they have a deep connection to the music. It's those two traits that seem to really just take off. So if you're a young player, you really want to get ahead. These are the things you have to cultivate: a deep sense of purpose and a deep connection to the music. Dude, that's a great place to leave this thing. We can
Yeah, I think
playing.
so. Excellent.
Yeah. So high range routines, they're everywhere. Everybody's is pretty decent. You can get mine for free on Trombone Guide. There are lots of other really good ones. For a long time, I was doing the Alessi warm up as my high range, doing those arpeggios. Took me a year to be able to get through all of them without getting tired, and then I was really proud, and that was helpful. Brent Phillips has a warm up that's really good.
Norman Bolter. Norman Bolter's another good one.
Yeah, that's a good one. John Whitaker has a warm up that has some pretty good high range stuff in it online that's free.
No shortage.
Pollard has a video on his YouTube channel that is really wonderful, and it's long. It's like 40 minutes of him doing it with you. So like, I mean, Paul Pollard was just what a spectacular player, and listening to how he practices is really humbling because of the focus he brings to everything.
That video's got to be turning like 10 years old soon.
That didn't make me feel good. Don't say that out loud, Kevin. Come on, man.
It's a good video that I've watched it like 100 times. It's a good video.
Yeah, I mean, like, here's the deal. If you want answers, they're out there. Start searching. But if you find that you are having trouble and continually running up against a wall, and you think there's something wrong with your technique, or you think there's something wrong with your approach, and you know that you're using tension, and you know that you're using a muscle, and you can't quite figure it out, pay the money to take a lesson with someone that knows. Me or somebody, like, there are many people like me that do this. There are many people around your area. You can find someone, take the time, pay a professional to sit down and look at it, because it will save you a lot of time in the long run if you're doing something wrong.
Yeah, there you go. I love it. All right, y'all. Well, from Do I Need a Bigger Mouthpiece? The answer is to play high. No, you
No,
don't.
you do not. Do not do that.
Yes, explicitly do not. But for most of the podcast, thank you so much for listening. If you made it this far, make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you follow us on Instagram, and keep doing the good work.
Yeah, we're having so much fun. So thanks for tuning in and happy practicing, everyone. Ding, 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 ding. Ding, 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 ding.